The Durbar in Lahore was a series of articles written for a Russian newspaper by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, in which he talks about the condition of India and what the English were doing to India and the details of what Indians were like at that time. Every time I express my honest opinion about the injustice and cruelty of the English towards the natives, when conversation turns to their mutual relationship, the former assure me I am mistaken, since I know nothing about their subtle politics, and the latter, in answer to my pacificatory expressions and words of consolation, attempt to convince me that there is no single Englishman in India who wishes them well. Soon I came to the following conclusion: both sides exaggerate, the one of its great virtues and merit, and the other its seemingly undeserved fate. The former, inspired probably by the wise proverb that dogs go mad from overeating, seemed to undergo a complete change, as it were, on their arrival in India from England. The latter, we will grant, have not individually deserved such a cruel fate, but India, as a whole, is carrying the heavy burden of her age old sins. By her own past, she has herself fashioned the misfortunes of the present, and her present position was inevitable. More remarkable still is the fact that absolutely nothing is known in England of the activities of the English in India or the state of the natives under the English yoke. How true this is may be inferred from the following. An educated Hindu goes to Europe after having partially renounced his superstitious prejudices concerning both his country and his caste. He travels first class, no longer dressed as a sansculate, but almost in European style. He wipes his nose with a handkerchief and not with the fork of Adam. His manners, like those of all natives, are quiet, even refined. Even his education is by no means inferior and is sometimes considerably superior to that of most of his English traveling companions. In spite of this, his journey is divided into two phases. The first extends as far as Aden, and the second from Aden to London. From India to Aden, that is to the midpoint of his trip, the English will shrink from him. They will look upon him as a despicable creature belonging to a lower race. In other words, they will ignore his presence, and he will rarely have the courage to assert his right of sitting with them at the common table. But beyond Eden, and before the steamer has lost sight of the shore, everything and everybody changes as if by the wielding of a magic wand. The Hindu is drawn into conversation. He is not avoided any longer. And if it should happen that some Indian official is on the ship on home leave, even he will probably discuss politics with him, while the official's wife will condescend to draw his attention to the weather. The same happens on the return journey. From England to Aden will be a paradise, but the streamer will barely have rounded the burning mounts of Arabia and reached Bab el Mandab when the stage setting is again altered. The free British subject become the abject English slave of whom the people in England have no conception. This is no fiction, but a fact confirmed every week. Who then is to blame for this? Is it England with its laws and institutions which guarantee equality for all? Or is it the English, namely the English in India? Quite a different thing. Of course, we must blame the Anglo-Indians. They alone, during the last 20 years, have built up these prejudices which feed their arrogance and conceit. In India, where everybody makes obeisance to them in serf like fashion, these two vices are encouraged in proportion to their climate infected livers. In England, none of them would dare to admit the sheer Asiatic despotism and contempt with which they treat the Hindus. And not only in England, but even here, every one of them at any such hint denies it and tries to refute any direct accusation. Peter blames Paul, but will never confess to sin himself. Are you not ashamed to treat the poor Hindus like that, as though they were dumb animals? I asked a most amiable and kindly Briton in whose brother's house I was staying at that time. The amiable Briton opened wide his blue eyes, and his pink face assumed an expression of astonishment. Treat them how? Do I treat them badly? You do not exactly decorate them with medals, do you? When opportunity affords you, treat them as a Castilian driver treats an obstinate mule. You must be mistaken. I cannot speak for others. There are naturally people in our colony, that is the English, who are perhaps a bit rough on the natives, but personally, I am not one of them. You are really not being fair, you know. Well, what about yesterday when the old Rao Bahadur came to your study and having entered in his stockings remained humbly standing at the door? You not only did not ask him to be seated, but did not let him come within 10 steps of you. My dear friend, you reason like a woman, exclaimed my friend. The old man's visit was an official one, and I have no right to depart for his sake from the wise policy of our administrators, which is to treat the natives with cold reserve. Otherwise, they would have no respect for us. This is a policy of estrangement. It probably coincides with a policy of approach, which is by no means ambiguous. Did you not, in my presence, push your gardener, who was peacefully occupied with his work in the flower bed, merely because he happened to stand in your way when we walked along the path? That was unintentional, said my friend, a little abashed. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish their dark skins from the earth. Is that so? Well, tell me then, this dark complexioned gardener of yours, is he or is he not a British subject? Well, of course he is, admitted my companion, somewhat unwillingly, sensing possibly treachery in my unexpected question. And he shares equal rights with the English gardener, for example? Yes, but what are you driving at? I don't understand. Oh, nothing in particular, only the curiosity of a foreigner and a woman. I like to draw deductions from comparisons. What is your opinion? If you were to give an English gardener an undeserved or even a deserved slap in the face, would you not risk a return blow? Your gardener would have the law on his side, and you, as an instigator, would be fined. Well, suppose the Hindu in turn, as a British subject, reciprocated similarly. My fair friend fairly jumped. I would have him beaten to death. A Hindu may be a British subject, but he is not English. This exclamation contains a whole tome of admission. It places a seal, as it were, on the sentence pronounced on an entire nation and its present, if not future destiny. Everyone knows that England is a great and powerful nation. Everyone knows that England as a nation cannot help wishing India as one of its best colonies, at least material success, if not ethical growth, if only to uphold a proverb that no one sets fire to his own harvest. And in this material respect, England does indeed all she can to help India without sparing either labor or money. True, this labor is rewarded from India's treasury, but the fact that England acts selfishly in this regard cannot alter the fact that she is preparing a magnificent future for India. If only the child can survive this period of stern education, a future, in fact, as would have been unthinkable for the stagnant country during either the Mughal dynasties or its periods of autonomy, as prejudice and age old customs have always hampered its progress. Much sorrow and suffering has the great Bharata experienced in her time, but this suffering has but the better prepared her for the complete renaissance that awaits her. Only 20 years ago, the Hindu would have chosen 1,000 deaths rather than accept a glass of water offered him by a European or in the latter's house. And not only a European, but a Muslim, a Parsi, or a Hindu belonging to a different caste. To take liquid medicine prepared in a public drugstore medicine compounded with water was considered a mortal sin. To sit beside a compatriot of another caste was equal to being expelled from one's own, and that meant everlasting dishonor. Ice and soda water were looked upon with disgust, but nowadays medicine as well as ice and soda water, and especially a network of railways, have accomplished that purpose. Under the influence of civilization, even though it has been forced upon the nation, those age old prejudices that ruined India and made her such an easy prey to the first adventurers who desired to possess her are beneath gradually to beginning gradually to melt like a frozen puddle beneath a sunbeam. Without a doubt, the English have conferred and continue to confer inestimable benefits on India. But I repeat, for her future, but by no means for her present. Their boast is that even if they had given her nothing but their protection against Muslim invasion and their help for the complete suppression of civil dissensions, they would still have done more for India than any other power, including the Hindus themselves, from the time of the first Mohammedan invasion. Possibly England has done even more than that, but then the present Anglo Indian government is acting like a stepmother who ill treats her stepsons and starves them secretly behind her husband's back, even though it strictly carries out in all other aspects the programs submitted by the home government. Unfortunately for India, England is very distant, and the Anglo Indian government is always at India's throat with a whip in its hand. Naturally enough, the natives cannot be content with this and are perpetually complaining. However, although most of their complaints are justified, they are themselves at fault in many things. Instead of gaining profit for the future from the lessons of the past, they act like ostriches, hiding their heads in the sand and giving way to bitterness in the present. If the English were to treat the natives humanely, their power would appear less despotic. The Indians would not tremble before them as they do, and that power would seem more firmly rooted than is evident at present on Indian soil, though through the love and gratitude of the people. Quiet and gentle, the majority of the natives are ready to lick any caressing hand and to show gratitude for every bone thrown to them. If the English were less ferociously contemptuous towards the Hindus and more kindly to the people, their prestige would possibly diminish, but their safety in the conquered country would become more firmly established in the future. But it is precisely this they do not wish or cannot understand. They seem completely to forget what every child knows, that their prestige is a sparkling soap bubble entirely dependent on external events beyond their control. Their power in India is well established even with the present caste system, merely because the natives have a superstitious idea about their invincibility and find in it no trace of an Achilles heel. Also, because according to the teachings of Krishna, they dare not go against the inevitable. Being fatalists, they believe that they are living in the Kali Yuga, the Black Age, and cannot expect anything favorable as long as this age lasts on earth. In these two superstitions, as if in two impregnable fortresses, lie concealed the power and safety of the English. But let the British army be badly beaten somewhere, and the soap bubble will burst, and the superstition will vanish from the mind of the Hindus, like the visions in a nightmare at the moment of waking. In India, wherever two Englishmen meet, complaints about the fiendish ingratitude of the black devils are soon heard, and wherever two natives encounter each other, complaints about the dark intentions of the white oppressors will pour forth. Taken together, these complaints produce the same effect on the listener as the duet of two blind men in the operetta bearing that title. In deceiving England concerning India, unconsciously it may be, these oppressors deceive themselves. They treat the natives like slaves or chained dogs, and the slave takes refuge in a slave's only weapon, lies and cunning. And the dog will sink its teeth into the master's neck if it ever breaks loose from the chain. Unless this destructive influence of all the noble virtues of this people, sentiments of honor, of duty to one's neighbor, of gratitude, and all these die out and are superseded by either negative qualities, complete apathy, or the lowest form of vice. 30 years ago, you could go to the nearest money changer, who is likewise a banker, sitting on the street in his hut, safely leave your entire capital with him without even taking a receipt. You could then go away and returning in a year or two, lay your claim before him. And at your first word, the banker money exchanger would return the money, even though it were a million. In those blessed days, a Hindu's word was sacred, and he was expelled from his caste for the least dishonest action. Until the upheaval of 1857, receipts were practically unknown in India. One witness was sufficient for any kind of transaction. And now mercenary witnesses have multiplied not by hundreds but by thousands. A Hindu will outcheat 10 gypsies. In the good old days, in allowing the native to hold a cow's tail in his hand and take his oath on it, the judge could guarantee with his life that the Hindu would never bear false witness on the sacred tail. Nowadays, according to the new judicial procedure, they are all, without exception, forced to give their oath on the Bhagavad Gita, a scripture about Krishna, even when the witness does not believe in Krishna but worship Shiva or Vishnu. The cow's tail, don't you see, shocked too greatly the inborn aesthetic sentiments of the British, is the English explanation of this jurisdiction change. But was it not from an overdone intent to reward India in an artistic and aesthetic manner that she was shamed in an economic and moral sense? Judge for yourself, having, for instance, embellished the country with gorgeous public buildings, mostly prison castles and barracks. They permitted a memorial such as the 2000-year-old Sarnath, erected before the time of Alexander of Macedonia, to decay and fall apart as it pleased. Having directed their constructive energies towards the building of universities, town halls, clubs, Masonic lodges in European style, and having driven the natives out from these, especially the first named, they compensated the latter by giving them complete control over all the public houses which the English had built with the purpose of selling the adulterated alcohol of their own country, including that toxicant known as Scotch whisky. They forced all Indians to dress in the products of Manchester and thus brought ruin to all the cotton and other weaving industries of the country. They forced the Hindus to worship gods manufactured in Birmingham and to cut with Sheffield steel. They even taught them gluttony, to eat after they had filled themselves with whiskey, damaged preserves that rot here in 1 week. Consequently, they die by the hundreds from cholera. What room is there for aesthetics? Prison castles and barracks. They permitted a memorial such as the 2000. A Hindu rightly told me that the European civilization, for which the natives are not ready and which they cannot appreciate, has the same influence in their country as a luxurious but poisonous machineel tree transplanted into a blossoming garden. It kills all the plants with its deadly exhalations. Can this possibly be revenge? This young student asked with perplexity. Revenge for our last mutiny? Neither India in general nor we, the people of this generation, are guilty of this crime. Why then should it be? May the Shimla dignitaries forgive me for this involuntary suspicion, but there is a grain of truth in the remark of this poor student. Louis Jacquelot noticed this long ago. The English were frightened as never before. They will never forgive India for this, he says in one of his books. The revenge has, of course, long become unconscious, but the British are vindictive by nature. To imagine these people unquestionably intelligent in their politics as consciously doing all they can to ruin and perhaps even lose India, the most precious pearl in the crown of the empress, would indeed be too stupid. And yet, this is exactly what they are doing. And I have often heard this stated in friendly conversation with Englishmen who lived many years in India and knew the country and its inhabitants as well as their own five fingers, and who had declined to work in a government office on account of their complete disgust with the new system. In spite of all efforts and ameliorations, training farms and skilled technicians, the fate of two-thirds of the farming population does not improve, but deteriorates every day. The majority of these unfortunates have to be content with one meal a day. And what a meal! The most wretched beggar in Russia would turn away from such food. The watchdog of a miserly Jew is fed better. A handful of half-rotten groats, rice is too expensive, or a small bunch of withered vegetables in water, such as the daily food of a coolie. Poor, miserable Indian coolie. Is there a creature in the world more patient and more wretched than him? He rises before dawn and lies down to rest on a damp Mother Earth late at night, working 16 hours a day in exchange for 4 annas, one, and sometimes for kicks. As to a god, he has none because there is no time for one. Besides, he cannot borrow God from anywhere or anyone. The Brahmin, as repulse the poor wretched like a an uncouth pariah, and strictly forbid him knowledge of the Vedas or prayers from the Vedas. Even the Padris have ceased enticing him to embrace Christianity with a silver rupee clenched in the same fist which offers him the cross. The coolie accepts the coin, and no sooner has the Padri sprinkled him with holy water than he goes and buys cow dung with the acquired sum, besmears himself from head to toe with the sacred product, and thereupon assumes the role of an idol for other coolies who pray to him. The attitude of the English as regards the natives of the better and more educated class, coldly contemptuous and crushing as it is in this instance much more a serious thing. All the more so since the cultured natives are not used to this. It did not exist at the time of the East India Company. Listen to what the statesmen, the most frank of the London journals, say about the feelings of the Hindus towards their rulers. It is not India's financial status that causes the greatest uneasiness, says the paper, but the state to which the bulk of the population have been brought through our administration, through our unquestionably despicable conduct with regard to the native rulers. We are detested alike by the classes which were powerful and influential before our time, and by the students of our own educational institutions in India, the schools and colleges. We are detested because we egoistically deprive them completely of all honorable or profitable position in the management of their own country. We are detested by the masses for all the indescribable suffering, for that fearful poverty into which our rule has plunged them. Finally, we are detested by the native princes for the tyranny and oppression the similar foreign office has practiced upon them. These words were reprinted in all the native newspapers and journals without comment. Was it like this at the time of the East India Company, which was banished from the country because of the last mutiny? No, of course not. With all its egoism, extortions, avidity, and unfairness, the defunct company knew how to get on with the natives. It did not constantly force them to feel the superiority of its origin. The natives themselves recognized the excellence of the armed equipment and the moral stamina of the English, and at that time respected them, while now they only fear and detest them. In those days, when a journey to India meant a round the world trip, adventurers who sought a fortune across the seas became the real Anglo-Indians. Many of them, having lived there without a break for 30 or 40 years, or even from birth to death, not in proud isolation as is now the case, but after many years spent in the daily company with the natives, became at last so used to their manner of living and even their thinking that they understood the needs of India and sympathized with these no less than the Hindus themselves. In those happy days, they did not despise the natives and flaunt their white skins, and even frequently legally married the native woman. They too quarreled with the Rajas and with the lawful landowners whose property they appropriated in the name of England, but they got on well with the people and maintained friendly relations with them. Then suddenly came an unforeseen disaster. The thunderbolt of 1857 struck the country and changed everything. With the death throes of Delhi came the end of the famous company also. The bold adventurers, who were gentlemen nevertheless, and who until that time had controlled the destinies of the Indian people, vanished in the whirlwind that uprooted both the Mughal Empire and the final independence of hundreds of Rajas. India was handed over to the crown, and in place of the bold adventurers, new people were sent out and reforms were inaugurated. I do not know if England gained by the change. It would be out of place to go into this question now, but if the unanimous testimony of the natives as well as the admission of many Englishmen are credited, India lost a great deal. What did it matter to the Hindus that the unscrupulous activities of such adventurers as Warren Hastings and hence, company became henceforth impossible in India? For people with such original opinions built up through the ages as the Hindus and generally speaking all Asiatics have regarded any voluntary mutual agreement, an administrator in the Oriental style, such as Hastings, who was ready to look with favor on any kind of offering, ranging from an entire province down to bourgeois pups in the style of Gogol, was far more acceptable than an administrator of the Bacon, Beaconsfieldian drawing room, lapdog variety. It was possible to come to an agreement and to enter into personal relationships with the former, while losing on one hand to win on the other, but the latter appearing like some kind of unapproachable luminary, bureaucrat, and formalist, looked on the natives as vermin, which must not be touched even with gloved hands, but only ruled over with its tail firmly crushed under one's heel. As a result of the mutiny and with the new order brought into the country, the Hindu, without doubt, became more civilized. Together with the above mentioned charming European aesthetics, he learned much that he had not known in the days of the company. As for instance, that Themis may just as well as that may be just as blind in civilized as in uncivilized countries. Yet to make up for this, she must also remain incorruptible. But he gained this knowledge theoretically only, without, of course, having any faith in the principle itself and in practice often trusting to the reverse. From his masters, he learned the refined ideas on civic virtue in general and the honor of a gentleman in particular, while he himself, under the constant pounding of the heavy waves of English contempt, lost even the last conception of his own honor as well as all feeling of self respect. It follows then that the British government, with the best intention, is ruining India. As far as I can see, this is a situation that cannot be remedied through England, though England should correct all the mistakes of the last 20 years, especially those of the administration of Disraeli. Even so, she is incapable of either remedying the damaged morality of the country or of changing the nature of the English, who have cut a deep rut for themselves as a result of their contempt for everything native, and who have on their side dug such strong, albeit artificial dikes that they will never in 1,000 years reach an understanding with the Indians. The waters of the Thames will soon merge with the waters of the Ganges. Then will the Englishman in India look upon the Hindu as his equal, though the latter were 1,000 times a Maharaja and his family descended from the days of Adam. The English feel a positively insurmountable aversion for the Hindus. As I pointed out above, this is a psychophysiological and not a political question. Apart from a few old Anglo-Indians who lived through the mutiny, the officials who are sent from England, even if they enter the country without any particular strong prejudice, are immediately infected by the atmosphere around them and forcibly drawn into it and cannot oppose the public opinion which is expressed by the entire English colony. To live among wolves, one must howl with them. This proverb applies to the English more than to any other European community. In its midst, it is dangerous even to sneeze in an un English way. Its members will immediately exchange glances with the usual smile, which is a mixture of almonds and vinegar, and will become more august, more gracious in their manner towards a sneezing individual and nod their heads as if to say, poor foreigner. He is not familiar with the elegant conventions of our society. It is only the enormous salary, unthinkable in another colony, and the profits derived from the Indian service that attracts the functionary. He resides here only with the hope of returning home. He counts the time by 3 year periods, from one home leave to another. He makes for himself a little artificial English world in this country, and all that exists beyond the boundaries of this world evokes in him an inexpressible squeamishness and disgust. Having described the English and the characteristics they have developed here, let us look at the natives and see how far they deserve their harsh fate. Let me here express a thought which may seem paradoxical, though it is supported by irrefutable facts. The Hindus lack and are incapable of having that sentiment which we Europeans qualify as patriotism, namely, love for one's country in the abstract sense of the word. They have no warm attachment for the established institutions of their native country, such as an all inclusive sentiment, which sometimes electrifies a whole nation and makes it rise as one man to the glorification or the defense of country. They have no responsiveness to its joys and sorrows, its renown or its dishonor. The reason they lack this sentiment is quite understandably simple, and indeed an obvious and generally well known fact. Except for the parental house or hut where he first chanced to see the light of day. The Hindu, generally speaking, has no other home. There is more than this. The native, as a result of the sacred laws prescribed to him by his religion, often considers his closest neighbors across the fence of his parents' garden not as compatriots, but as foreigners of an entirely different race. If these neighbors belong to some other caste than his own, this is readily confirmed by the fact, for instance, speaking of a Hindu living, let us say, on the opposite side of the field, the first Hindu will refer to him as a Vilayati, a term of contempt not limited to Europeans alone. Thus, the native, unfamiliar with the sentiment of patriotism, in case of invasion or civil dissension, apart from the personal courage which drives him to defend his hearth and family to the last drop of his blood, showed and still shows little interest either in the fate of India in an integral sense or for that of his neighbor, if that if the later is of some other caste than his own, or even some other special division or subdivision of the caste to which he himself belongs. Geographically, the country is divided into hundreds of tribes and nationalities, nominally into two races, Aryans and Semites, or Hindus and Mughals. In other words, two main religions, the Mohammedan and the Brahmanical. These sects are involved in an age old, irreconcilable feud, and only the presence of the British troops restrained the fanaticism of the two races, who would otherwise cut each other's throats at any one of their respective religious festivals. And of such festivals, there are several dozens a year, both for the Mughals and for the Hindus, especially the latter. Moreover, even the Mohammedans in India are divided into a large number of mutually antagonistic sects that are unknown to the Orthodox believer in Turkey and Europe. As for Hindus, it is useless to speak about them. Nominally, they are some 200 million of the Brahmanical faith and worship according to the sacred laws of Manu and the Vedas. But for that matter, even fishes who prey upon each other live in the same water. Look at the night sky with its thousands of stars when there is no moon. If you would have a conception of the castes and subcastes, the divisions and subdivisions of the Brahmanical faith, they themselves say that sacred Vedas are the universal shoreless ocean from the bitter salt waters of which flow thousands of fountainheads of the purest water. Think of it in this way: the waters of the Veda ocean are too salty for the average stomach. Thus, in order to make them palatable, cunning hydrologists appear in the guise of Brahmanas and busy themselves in filtering these waters, each one interpreting the ancient scriptures in their own way. After some centuries, the result was as follows. The Hindus nominally divide their race into four castes: one, Brahmanas, or sons of the god Brahma; two, Kshatriyas, or warriors; three, Vaishyas, or merchants; four, Shudras, or artisans, the lowest class. But each of these castes is divided into subcastes ranging from 5 to 13, which in their turn split up into innumerable fragments. In other words, each caste is a scale of notes descending from the highest to the lowest, but instead of 7, it contains 70 times 7 notes. Thus, for example, in the two main divisions into which Brahmanas of the highest aristocracy, the Panchadravidas and the Panchagaudas, the former being the southern and the latter the northern inhabitants of India, we observe that the two subcastes may neither intermarry nor eat together if there be even one drop of water in the food. But both these subcastes are Brahmins and they may not eat each other kind of food in each other's company. A Gujarati Brahmin will accept water from the hands or will not accept water from the hands or from the house of a Maratha Brahmin, but will not touch the rice prepared by the latter. A Desata Brahmin is permitted to speak to a Karhada Brahmin from a distance, but if accidentally he should cross the latter's shadow or touch him, he will become heavily polluted. The question is, with such a system, can India not only be a nursery for patriotism, as some writers imagine her, but in addition bring forth her own patriots in time? There are about 200 million Hindus professing the same faith, but since Christianity does not prevent a similar and even greater number of Europeans from fighting and hitting each other, so likewise is it in India. The country has Maratha Hindus and Punjab Hindus, Bengalis and Dravidians, Gujaratis and Rajputs, Kashmiris and Nepalis. and yet all are Hindus. Nevertheless, to assume from this the Rajput consider Deccan and Bengal part of his country, and that should arise occasion arise, he would undertake the defense, is as foolish a hope as that inhabitant of Moscow should burn with the desire to avenge the English who may have been beaten by the Zulus, or that he would look upon Spain as part of his country just because it lies in Europe. The English allow the world to believe that they, with a comparatively small army, calmed the rebels in 1857, conquered and reduced to ashes the Mughal dynasty in Delhi, and at long chained the Indian Rajas to the heels of Great Britain, as prisoner kings were chained to the chariots of their conquerors in ancient times. But do they not boast of these great deeds simply because the story of mutiny has never been told by anyone except themselves? Since they cannot erase this bloody page from the annals of the conquest of India, they elaborate it in their own way. Were the facts to be presented in their true colors, however, it would become evident that they would never have subdued the rebels if the Punjabis, especially the Sikhs, had not helped them. No one would be foolish enough to doubt either their individual courage or the superiority of their martial genius, their weapons and all else, over those of the Asiatic people. But force breaks a straw, and even if during the mutiny they threw heart and soul into the military contest, the Punjabis, on the other hand, together with some other tribes who remained faithful to England, were the powerful hand which crushed one by one the head of the many headed Hydra, which was preparing to make a meal of the absent minded Britons. And without exception, they would have swallowed up in the mutiny for our faithful Punjabis, as the English express it in their rare moments of fair mindedness towards the natives. And yet, Hindu rose against Hindu, brother against brother, not because of devotion or special love for the English, but in the first place simply to satisfy the Sikhs' personal vengeance against the Hindus of central India, whose armies and many tribes helped their common enemy to conquer Lahore and Punjab in 1845 to 49, and also because of their age old hatred of the Mughals. Those who assume the English conquered India are mistaken. They merely came and took it, little by little, appropriating province after province, territory after territory. They met with oppositions from the Rajas and fought the independent rulers, but the people always remained unconcerned and indifferent spectators of the fighting. Apart from the above mentioned complete lack of patriotism in the Hindus, this indifference can also be explained by the following little known fact. With the exception of the Mughals and some essentially Indian dynasties, the now existing Pleiades of Maharajas and Rajas were not in past times either kings or even independent rulers of the territories. Being without exception members of the Kshatriya caste, they were merely the armed protectors of the people who lived within a certain area in this or that Indian territory. And as they received a common consent, a certain tribute in the form of produce and money, they agreed to defend the area in case of aggression by their neighbors and generally to safeguard its interests while ruling it, settling its grievances according to the laws of Manu. These laws were known throughout India and were, as they still are, held sacred and consequently immutable. The whole of Hindustan, therefore, in spite of its varieties of castes and religious texts, including its hundreds of individual rights, followed the same laws, the sacred text of which is insurmountable forms an insurmountable obstacle to any kind of reform. With the passing of the ages, the code of the laws of Manu become a dead letter. The country was covered with slime like a pool of stagnant water and was overcome by a senile sleep, awakening only spasmodically here and there whenever occurred some momentary trouble occasioned by one of its enemies. But not once from the first to the present page of her history did India rise as a whole and shake off its centuries old mustiness. Not once did any of her sons voice their pain when the invading enemy crippled some of her son. The English came and offered to substitute their protection for that of the Rajas. Among the nations of Hindustan, one thought it over, another pondered upon it, and each in turn, seeing that the newcomers were besting their former protectors and were thus the stronger of the two, seeing that the English offered them a similar or even more reliable protection, and realizing that the tribute demanded did not seem at first too high, began to yield without opposition, one after another. They were not asked to give up either the laws of Manu or the beliefs of their forefathers, and so, without any loss to themselves, as they believed, they obtained conditions that were far more favorable. Why should they be concerned individually about what happened to the other collectively? Who among the Hindus, apart from the Brahmins, care whether the country be under the rule of one Bilaiti or another?